Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be diving into something that I think we all have experienced at some point in our careers: manipulative coworkers.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at a blog post by Mahbub Zaman Ashrafi titled "Dealing with Manipulative Coworkers: Insights and Solutions." And this blog post really kind of like blew my mind. It was fascinating
Yeah,
and a little bit unsettling.
it's packed with insights
Yeah,
into the often subtle tactics that manipulators use.
Yeah, it's kind of scary how common these things are. And, I was reading through it and I was like, oh my gosh, I've experienced this and this and this.
Right.
So I think this is going to be a really valuable deep dive for anyone who's ever felt like they're being manipulated at work,
Yeah,
which I think is probably most of us at some point.
absolutely. Manipulative behavior in the workplace is more common than we'd like to think.
Yeah, for sure. So to kick things off, maybe you can give us a little bit of context about why this is such an important topic to address. Like, why should we even care about understanding these tactics?
Well, because manipulative behavior can be incredibly damaging. It's not just about annoying quirks or personality clashes. It can really erode trust and collaboration, creating a toxic work environment.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like it goes beyond just being a personal annoyance.
Yeah.
It can actually impact the whole team's dynamic and productivity.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that these tactics often fly under the radar. They can be very subtle, almost disguised as normal workplace behavior, which makes them even more insidious.
That's what I found so fascinating about Ashrafi's blog post. He really breaks down these tactics in a way that makes you realize, oh, wow, I've totally seen this happen before, but I didn't even realize it was manipulation. So to kind of like set the stage for our deep dive, can you walk us through the three main categories of manipulative tactics that Ashrafi outlines in his post?
Sure, he divides them into psychological, behavioral, and emotional manipulation.
Okay, those sound pretty distinct. What are the key differences between those categories?
Well, the categories highlight how manipulative coworkers can attack on multiple levels. It's not always about overt aggression or bullying. It can be about preying on your insecurities, exploiting your good nature, or even subtly shifting the balance of power within the workplace.
Okay, so it can be like a slow burn almost.
Yeah.
Like you don't even realize it's happening until you're already feeling undermined or like you're doubting yourself.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so dangerous.
Yeah, totally. So let's start with psychological manipulation. What are some examples of tactics that fall into this category?
Psychological manipulation is all about playing mind games. It's about planting seeds of doubt, undermining your confidence, and making you question your own perceptions and judgment.
So it's like they're trying to mess with your head, basically.
Pretty much. Atrophy talks about things like instilling fear about job security even when there's no real threat,
Oh, wow.
or planting those little seeds of self-doubt, making you question your abilities and eroding your confidence.
It's so sneaky because it's not like they're outright saying, you're going to get fired or you're terrible at your job.
Right.
But they're like subtly implying it or creating this atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly effective because it preys on our deep-seated need for security and belonging.
Mhm.
When a coworker undermines your confidence, they're attempting to isolate you and make you more dependent on them. It's like they're trying to control the narrative about who you are and what you're capable of.
So they're almost like rewriting your reality in a way.
Precisely.
Okay, that's super creepy. All right, let's move on to behavioral manipulation. What are some of the tactics that fall into this category?
These are a bit more obvious and observable, things like shifting blame, taking credit for other people's work, and spreading rumors to damage reputations.
Yeah, those are all pretty classic examples of like bad workplace behavior.
Right. But they're not just about being annoying. They have real consequences.
Yeah, for sure. Because if someone is constantly throwing you under the bus or taking credit for your ideas, it can really impact your career trajectory and your overall reputation within the company.
Absolutely. These behaviors are often aimed at gaining power and control. Think about it. If someone can consistently shift blame onto you or take credit for your contributions, they're essentially rewriting your track record within the company.
It's like they're playing a game, but the stakes are your career and reputation.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the last category is emotional manipulation.
Mm.
I think this one is probably something that a lot of people can relate to because it feels very personal.
Yes. Emotional manipulation is all about exploiting your empathy and your desire to be helpful.
So it's like they're playing on your good nature.
Precisely. They might use guilt, shame, or even anxiety to get what they want. For example, consider the coworker who constantly plays the victim,
Ugh, yeah, I know that type.
always needing your help and support, but somehow You always end up doing their work for them.
It's like they're a black hole of neediness,
Hmm.
and you get sucked in.
Right. Or think about the coworker who uses anger or emotional outbursts to intimidate you into submission.
Oh, yeah. Those are fun. It's like they create this drama and chaos, and you just want to, like, avoid it at all costs, so you end up giving them what they want.
Exactly. They're masters at pushing your buttons and exploiting your emotional responses.
So basically, we need to be on the lookout for all three of these categories of manipulation: psychological, behavioral, and emotional, because they can all be really damaging in their own ways.
Absolutely. And the more we understand these tactics, the better equipped we'll be to recognize them and protect ourselves.
Okay, so Ashrafi's blog post doesn't just describe these tactics. He also provides solutions for how to counter them, and I'm really curious to delve into those solutions. But before we do that, I think it would be helpful to focus on some of the specific tactics he highlights,
I agree.
because I think the more we understand how these tactics work, the better equipped we'll be to recognize them in our own workplaces and to kind of like have our defenses up, so to speak.
Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to dealing with manipulators.
Right, exactly. So let's dive into some of the most common and honestly most frustrating tactics manipulators use. The first one that really jumps out at me is gaslighting. Like that one just sounds so unsettling.
Yeah, gaslighting is particularly insidious because it aims to make you doubt your own sanity.
Oh, wow. Like how does that even work?
Well, it's about distorting reality and making you question your own perceptions and judgment.
Okay, so it's like they're trying to make you feel crazy.
In a sense, yes.
Okay, so what does that look like in a work environment? Could you give me an example?
Imagine you're working on a project with a colleague and you distinctly remember them agreeing to a specific deadline. But as the deadline approaches, they completely deny ever having that conversation.
Oh no, I hate when that happens.
They might even start questioning your memory, saying things like, "Are you sure? Maybe you're just stressed and forgetting things."
Oh, that is so manipulative.
It's a way of making you doubt yourself and your ability to recall events accurately.
And when you start doubting yourself, it becomes incredibly difficult to assert your boundaries or stand up for yourself.
Exactly. Because you start to think, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I did misunderstand.
It's like they're rewriting history.
Right. And that can be incredibly damaging, both to your confidence and to your professional reputation.
Okay, so if we find ourselves in a situation like this, where someone is trying to gaslight us, what can we do to fight back?
Ashrafi suggests a really powerful solution: documentation. Keep detailed records of your conversations, agreements, and anything else that could be later distorted.
So, like, if you have an important conversation, make sure to follow up with an email summarizing what was discussed.
Exactly. Or take detailed notes during meetings. Think of it as creating a paper trail of reality.
So that if they try to twist the narrative, you can just, like, hit them with the facts.
Precisely. And this is especially important in situations where your performance reviews or career advancement could be affected.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because if someone is trying to make you look bad, having that documentation can be really crucial to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to another tactic that I know will resonate with everyone: guilt tripping.
Yes, the guilt trip.
A classic.
This one always gets to me because I'm like such a sucker for wanting to help people.
It's a very effective tactic because it preys on our desire to be liked and helpful.
Right. And it's hard to say no when someone is making you feel like you're letting them down or like you're a bad person if you don't help them.
Exactly. The goal is to make you feel obligated to help, even if it means sacrificing your own time and priorities.
And I feel like it often starts with like a lot of sighs and complaints about how overwhelmed they are. And then they hit you with the classic line, "You're so much better at this than I am. I just know you'd be able to handle it."
That's a textbook example of a guilt trip.
And it works. Like I fall for it every time. It's effective because it plays on your empathy. You want to be a good colleague and you don't want to let anyone down. But sometimes that desire to help can be exploited.
Yeah, and you end up feeling resentful because you're doing their work for them on top of your own work.
Right. So how do we deal with this? How do we say no to the guilt trip without feeling like a terrible person?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
The key is to set boundaries.
Okay, so like what does that look like in practice?
It means recognizing that you are not responsible for solving everyone else's problems.
That's a good reminder. We often feel like we have to be the hero and fix everything.
And it's okay to say no, even if it makes the other person unhappy. You can decline requests politely but firmly.
Okay, so like what are some good phrases to use when you need to say no to a guilt trip?
You could say something like, "I understand you're in a bind, but I'm not able to help with that right now. Perhaps you could talk to another colleague or see if there's a way to reprioritize your workload."
Okay, so it's about being firm, but also offering alternative solutions so you don't just sound like you're being completely unhelpful.
Precisely.
Okay, that's good advice.
Hmm.
I'm going to try to remember that next time I'm faced with the guilt trip. Now, let's talk about a tactic that I think is just so incredibly frustrating. Taking credit. Like, I can't stand when people do this.
It's a very common tactic, and it's incredibly demoralizing.
Yeah, it's not just about stealing recognition. It's about undermining your contributions and basically like erasing your hard work.
Right. It creates an imbalance of power within the team.
So can you paint me a picture of what this might look like in a real-life scenario?
Imagine you've been working late nights on a project, coming up with all these great ideas, and really putting in the effort.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Then, in a team meeting, your coworker just swoops in and presents all your ideas as their own, taking all the credit and basking in the praise, while you're left feeling completely invisible.
Uh-huh. It's like they're stealing your thunder.
It's a classic move that can have a ripple effect throughout the team, creating a culture of distrust.
Yeah, because if you know that someone is just going to steal your ideas, you're less likely to share them in the first place, which stifles creativity and innovation.
Exactly. And it allows the manipulator to build their reputation on the backs of others, which is completely unfair.
Okay, so how do we stop these credit thieves in their tracks? Because I can see how this could really damage your career in the long run.
Again, documentation is crucial. Keep a detailed record of your contributions.
So, like, keep track of your ideas, your progress, and your accomplishments.
Yes, emails, meeting notes, timestamp files. These are all valuable pieces of evidence that can help you prove your case if someone tries to take credit for your work.
It's like having receipts to show what you've actually done.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to speak up in meetings, clearly articulating your role in the project. It's about owning your accomplishments and making sure your voice is heard.
Okay, that makes sense. Don't be afraid to toot your own horn a little bit and make sure people know what you've contributed.
Right. If someone tries to interrupt or downplay your contributions, politely but firmly reiterate your role and the value you've brought to the project.
Yeah, be your own advocate. Okay, here's a tactic that's a little more subtle, but can be just as damaging in the long run. Playing the victim.
Ah, yes. The perpetual victim.
Everyone knows this person.
They always seem to be in crisis mode. And while it's natural to feel sympathy, sometimes that sympathy can be manipulated.
Yeah, it's like they're constantly surrounded by drama. And they're always the one who's being wronged or mistreated.
Right. Their personal life is a mess. Their boss is picking on them. They're always overwhelmed with work. It never ends.
And I think we've all been in situations where we've tried to help these people out, but then we end up feeling drained and resentful because we're doing their work for them or we're constantly getting sucked into their drama.
It's like they're energy vampires, feeding off your empathy and leaving you feeling depleted.
Yeah, exactly. So how do we deal with these master manipulators of sympathy?
Yeah.
Because it's hard to know how to be supportive without being manipulated.
The key is to recognize the pattern.
Okay, so like once you start to see that their victimhood is a recurring theme, not just like a one-time thing, you can start to detach a little bit emotionally.
Precisely. You can offer support, but don't get sucked into their drama. Remember, you're not responsible for fixing their problems.
That's a good point. There's a difference between being supportive and being manipulated.
Right. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to encourage them to take responsibility for their own actions and choices.
Yeah, like help them to see that they have the power to change their situation.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we have time for one more tactic before we wrap up this part of our deep dive.
Okay.
And this one is just like plain nasty, spreading rumors.
Yeah.
This is the type of manipulation that can really like destroy someone's reputation and career.
It's a form of social sabotage that can create a toxic work environment filled with fear and distrust.
Okay, so let's say you're working hard, you're building a solid reputation within your company, and then out of nowhere, you start hearing these whispers about you, things that are completely untrue or wildly exaggerated.
Right. It could be about your work ethic, your personal life, or even just fabricated gossip designed to make you look bad.
It's like a virus spreading through the workplace, and once it takes hold, it can be really hard to stop.
Absolutely. It's a very effective way to damage someone's credibility and undermine their standing within the company.
So if you find yourself being targeted by these rumor mongers, what can you do to protect yourself?
The first step is to address the rumors directly. Don't let them fester and grow.
Okay, so don't just ignore them and hope they go away.
Right. If you hear something untrue being said about you, politely but firmly correct the misinformation.
So confront the people who are spreading the rumors.
Yes, and explain that what they're saying is not true. You can also talk to your manager or HR if the rumors are persistent or particularly damaging.
It's about taking control of the narrative and making sure the truth is heard.
Precisely.
Okay, wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've explored some of the most common manipulative tactics used in the workplace, from gaslighting to guilt tripping to spreading rumors.
Yeah.
And while it can be a little bit disheartening to realize how prevalent these tactics are, I think it's also empowering to be able to recognize them.
I agree. Awareness is the first step towards protecting yourself.
Right. So in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve into Ashrafi's solutions for countering these tactics and creating a more positive and productive work environment. Stay tuned.
I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back. It's great to be diving back into these manipulation tactics.
Yeah, I'm ready for more.
All right, well, let's jump into another one that I think a lot of people have probably experienced, even if they didn't realize it was manipulation at the time. What Ashrafi calls one-sided deals.
Okay, one-sided deals. So what exactly does he mean by that? Is it just a bad deal, or is there something more insidious going on?
It's definitely more than just a bad deal. It's more like the manipulator disguises an unfair agreement as something that benefits both of you. They'll try to present it as this, like, win-win situation.
Oh, I see. So it's like they're trying to trick you into thinking you're getting a good deal when in reality you're the one who's making all the sacrifices.
Yeah, exactly. They might use, like, really charming language, or they'll exaggerate the benefits, or they'll really downplay the drawbacks to make it seem like, oh, this is such a great opportunity for you.
It's like they're putting a shiny bow on a box full of nothing.
Pretty much. So can you think of any examples of how this might play out in a real work setting?
Hmm. Yeah, I think
Uh,
one example would be like if you're asked to take on this extra project, on top of your already full workload.
hmm
And they might say, oh, but this could lead to a promotion, like dangling that carrot in front of you.
Right, right. And they make it sound like it's this sure thing, but when you actually, like, dig into the details, it's like, well, there's no guarantee of a promotion. Or maybe the promotion is, like, way down the line.
Yeah. And meanwhile, you're stuck doing all this extra work for who knows how long.
And they might even say, like, oh, I'll help you out with your current workload to make it more manageable. But then their help ends up being, like, super minimal, or it never materializes at all.
Ugh, it's so frustrating.
So how do we protect ourselves from falling into these, like, one-sided traps?
Yeah, because it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of a new opportunity, but then you realize later that you've been had.
Right. Well, Ashrafi really emphasizes critical thinking and negotiation skills here.
So it's about taking a step back and really analyzing the terms of the agreement and making sure it's actually fair to both parties.
Yes. Don't let yourself get swayed by, like, pressure tactics or smooth talk. Carefully analyze the terms of any agreement and don't hesitate to push back if something doesn't feel right.
Okay, so it's about being assertive and advocating for yourself.
Exactly. And sometimes the best way to negotiate a better deal is to be willing to walk away. If the other person isn't willing to compromise or meet your needs, it might be better to decline the offer altogether.
Okay, so don't be afraid to say no. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up from Ashrafi's post, and it's kind of a controversial one. The idea of manipulating the manipulator.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting concept.
Is this basically fighting fire with fire?
It can be seen that way, but it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay, so walk me through this. What does Ashrafi actually suggest?
Well, he suggests that sometimes you need to use strategic tactics to sort of outmaneuver someone who is trying to manipulate you.
So it's like you're not stooping to their level, but you are using their own game against them.
In a sense, yes. It's about recognizing the game they're playing and using your intelligence and awareness to, like, level the playing field.
It's like you're playing chess with a master, and you have to learn their moves in order to beat them at their own game.
Exactly. But it's super important to remember that this should always be, like, a last resort.
Yeah, you don't want to become a master manipulator yourself.
Right. The goal is to protect yourself, not to harm the other person.
So how do we walk that line? How do we make sure we're not crossing any ethical boundaries?
That's the tricky part. It's a delicate balance. Ashrafi stresses that any tactics you use should be focused on achieving a fair and equitable outcome. It's not about, like, seeking revenge or inflicting harm.
Okay, so it's more about self-preservation in a sometimes cutthroat work environment.
Exactly. But you have to be aware of the potential consequences. Like sometimes trying to manipulate a manipulator can just like totally backfire.
And escalate the situation.
Yeah. And then you're in even deeper trouble. So it's not something to take lightly.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd rather focus on just like building my awareness of these tactics so I can avoid them altogether.
That's a great approach. Prevention is always better than cure, as they say.
But it is good to know that there are options if you find yourself in a situation where you need to fight back.
Absolutely. And just remember, you're not alone in this. Manipulative behavior is unfortunately common in many workplaces, but by understanding these tactics, you can start to build your defenses.
So we've talked a lot about how manipulators operate,
Yeah.
the tactics they use. But I'm curious about like the why. What makes someone become a manipulator in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a good question. And unfortunately, there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it's probably pretty complex, right?
It is. It's often like a combination of personality traits, learned behaviors, and even like the workplace culture itself.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. Like what kind of personality traits might make someone more prone to manipulation?
Well, some people might just naturally be more inclined toward manipulative tactics. Maybe they lack empathy or they have this like really strong need for control.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see how those traits would make someone more likely to manipulate others.
Yeah, and some people might view the world as this like zero-sum game where for them to win, someone else has to lose.
Oh, so they see everything as a competition, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to come out on top.
Exactly. But it's also important to remember that workplace culture can play a huge role in this too.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a company rewards cutthroat competition and prioritizes individual achievement over teamwork, that kind of environment can create a breeding ground for manipulators.
Yeah, it's like they're being incentivized to be manipulative.
Right. So it's not always just about the individual. Sometimes the workplace itself is set up in a way that encourages this kind of behavior.
That's a really good point.
Mm.
So even if we're not being manipulated directly, is there anything we can do to help create a more ethical and supportive work environment? One where manipulation is less likely to thrive.
Yeah, definitely. I think a big part of it is fostering a culture of transparency and open communication.
So like making sure people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something wrong.
Exactly. And creating clear channels for reporting unethical behavior.
And I guess it's also about celebrating teamwork and collaboration, right? Instead of just focusing on individual success.
Absolutely. Because when people feel like they're all on the same team, there's less incentive to try to undermine each other.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
Okay, so let's bring it back to Ashrafi's solutions for dealing with manipulative coworkers directly.
Hmm.
We touched on a few of them earlier, like setting boundaries, assertive communication, and documentation.
Hmm.
Which of these solutions do you think is most important or most effective?
Well, honestly, I think they're all valuable tools. And the best approach really depends on the specific situation.
Yeah, true. Like what works with one manipulator might not work with another.
Exactly. But one thing that Ashrafi emphasized that really stuck with me is the importance of self-awareness.
Oh, interesting. So what does that mean in the context of dealing with manipulation?
Well, he argues that before we can effectively counter manipulation, we need to understand our own vulnerabilities.
Ooh, that's deep. Like what are our triggers? What are our weaknesses?
Yeah, exactly. What kind of manipulation are we most susceptible to?
I guess once you know your weak spots, you can kind of like shore up your defenses in those areas, right?
Exactly. You can develop strategies for setting boundaries, communicating assertively, and just recognizing manipulation when it's happening.
It's like creating a personal manipulation shield.
Haha, I like that.
Okay, well, I think that's a perfect note to end on. We've explored the dark side of the workplace, all the ways that people can manipulate each other.
Good.
But we've also come away with some really valuable tools and strategies for protecting ourselves.
And for creating a more positive and productive work environment.
Exactly. So if you're dealing with a manipulative coworker, remember, you're not alone.
Yeah.
And there are things you can do to take back your power.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, and by understanding these tactics, we can create a better workplace for everyone.
And don't forget to check out Mahbub Zama Ashrafi's blog post, Dealing with Manipulative Coworkers, Insights and Solutions, for even more insights and advice.
Great advice.
Okay, well that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.